Now I'm going to go straight over to Harold because I want more people as possible to listen to his 10 minutes telling us about the World Mental Health Forum Summit that starts on the 4th of October. So for now, Harold, I'm going to pass straight over to you and we'll come back to our members and what they're up to later. So let's move Stanley out the way and we'll get Harold. There we go. Over to you, Harold.
Thank you, Jill. Most of you already know my story. You know what we're doing, and you know that Jill is heavily involved this time in doing interviews for the upcoming conference as well. I have been doing interviews all last week, and it's been such an exhausting but also elating experience. There is so much that I was reminded of that I already knew, and there is so much I learned from each of the interviews that I didn't even know that I didn't know. So, and you can read in the comments on my LinkedIn profile some of the responses of these people and how they were really grateful for having been given a voice, which doesn't happen to many of us very often, and for someone patiently listening to what they have to say. And it's going to be a real great experience to present all of that next week. I was going to ask you, Jill, why did you choose Sir Ken Robinson and his quote for today's meeting?
I can't remember what the quote said off the top of my head, but I know at the time it resonated, and I've always admired his TED Talks and his whole philosophy around the next generation and teaching children and how they learn. And that's been a big part of our life with our kids. And I've been a teacher in the past, so it just resonated really well with me. So sad he's not here any longer.
Yes. I would just like to share a part of what he said with you, because I totally believe that we shouldn't just involve the living people, but also those great, brilliant minds that we have had already. And somehow we are lucky enough to have some recordings of the wisdom. I'd like to share part of that with you. This is from the most watched TED Talk of all times, more than 20 million times around the world, and just enjoy it. Can I?
Yep.
Do I need your permission to share my screen?
You're
No.
sharing. That's fine. That's great.
Good.
I say, Terry, please, I'm trying to fry an egg in here. You know, if give me a break. Actually, there was do you know that old philosophical thing? If a tree falls in a forest and nobody hears it, did it happen? Remember that old chestnut? I saw a great T-shirt really recently which said, if a man speaks his mind in a forest and no woman hears him, is he still wrong? Just... And the third thing about intelligence is it's distinct. I'm doing a new book at the moment called Epiphany, which is based on a series of interviews with people about how they discovered their talent. I'm fascinated about how people got to be there. It's really prompted by a conversation I had with a wonderful woman who most people have never heard of. She's called Gillian Lynn. Have you heard of her? Some have. She's a choreographer and everybody knows her work. She did Cats and Phantom of the Opera. She's wonderful. I used to be on the board of the Royal Ballet in England, as you can see. And anyway, Jill and I had lunch one day. I said, how'd you get to be a dancer? And she said it was interesting. When she was at school, she was really hopeless. And the school in the 30s wrote to her parents and said, we think Gillian has a learning disorder. You couldn't concentrate. She was fidgeting. I think now they'd say she had ADHD. Wouldn't you? But this was the 1930s and ADHD hadn't been invented, you know, at this point. So it wasn't an available condition. You know, people weren't aware they could have that. Anyway, she went to see this specialist. So this oak panel room, and she was there with her mother, and she was led and sat on this chair at the end, and she sat on her hands for 20 minutes while this man talked to her mother about all the problems Gillian was having at school. And at the end of it, because she was disturbing people, her homework was always late and so on, little kid of 8. In the end, the doctor went and sat next to Gillian and said, Gillian, I've listened to all these things that your mother's told me. I need to speak to her privately. So she said, wait here, we'll be back. We won't be very long. And they went and left her. But as they went out the room, he turned on the radio that was sitting on his desk. And when they got out the room, he said to her mother, just stand and watch her. And the minute they left the room, she said she was on her feet, moving to the music. And they watched for a few minutes, and he turned to her mother and he said, you know, Mrs. Lynn, Gillian isn't sick. She's a dancer. Take her to a dance school. I said, what happened? Said she did. I can't tell you how wonderful it was. We walked in this room, and it was full of people like me. People who couldn't sit still. People who had to move to think. Who had to move to think. They did ballet, they did tap, they did jazz, they did modern, they did contemporary. She was eventually auditioned for the Royal Ballet School. She became a soloist. She had a wonderful career at the Royal Ballet. She eventually graduated from the Royal Ballet School, found her own company, the Gillian Dance Company, met Andrew Lloyd Webber. She's been responsible for some of the successful musical theatre productions in history. She's given pleasure to millions, and she's a multi-millionaire. Somebody else might have put her on medication and told her to calm down. Now, I think what I think it comes to is this. Al Gore spoke the other night about ecology and the revolution that was triggered by Rachel Carson. I believe our only hope for the future is to adopt a new conception of human ecology, one in which we start to reconstitute our conception of the richness of human capacity. Our education system has mined our minds in the way that we strip mine the earth for a particular commodity. And for the future, it won't serve us. We have to rethink the fundamental principles on which we're educating our children. There was a wonderful quote by Jonas Salk who said, if all the insects were to disappear from the earth, within 50 years, all life on earth would end. If all human beings disappeared from the earth, within 50 years, all forms of life would flourish. And he's right. What TED celebrates is the gift of the human imagination. We have to be careful now that we use this gift wisely and that we avert some of the scenarios that we've talked about. And the only way we'll do it is by seeing our creative capacities for the richness they are and seeing our children for the hope that they are. And our task is to educate their whole being so they can face this future. By the way, we may not see this future, but they will. And our job is to help them make something of it. Thank you very much. Wow, go ahead. Get it.
What if great ideas weren't cherished? What if they carried no importance? Or held no value?
Very powerful, isn't it? So at World Mental Health Forum next week and all along, we're not just talking about mental health and well-being. We're not just talking about death and death by suicide. We're talking about life. I always remind people that the best suicide prevention is not prohibition, but that we are supporting life. We're not going around saying that we are saving lives. We're not saving lives. In the end, everyone will be saving themselves, but we are supporting life, and we're supporting the decisions that people are making concerning their life. We also think that it will have to come sooner or later that we no longer think about whether we allow suicide, because there's nothing for us to allow. Suicide doesn't need to be allowed because it is allowed. It's part of the human experience. We haven't given life, and therefore we cannot disallow someone returning their life. And we also believe that once we establish that the door to leaving for the next world is always open, once that discussion is out of the way, and that we are not locking anyone into this earth life, then we have a much better platform to talk about, now that we have answered that question, that you're always free, entirely free to leave life at any time you wish. Let's look at some of the things that you may still want to do while you're here, maybe for just another day or another week or another month. We think it makes no sense to try to keep people within a life that they hate. And most of what we suffer from is systemic, it's not personal. So what we obviously need to do is we need to create a life worth living. In that sense, we can do a lot of suicide prevention, because when people are thriving, when they're needed, when they have natural and fulfilling interactions, why should they leave?